Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining my little presentation today. My name's Mike Baker. I'm the Regional Vice President for Client Success at Cornerstone. For those of you who may not know Cornerstone, we're in the big white stand right there. And I'm going to be talking about learning in a social world. If I talk a little quickly, it's probably because I've been imbibing a few too many of our energy drinks. So if you want one as well, and you want to be as jittery as I am, feel free to drop by the stand and get one. So really today I'm going to talk about three key themes. Social and its impact today in the world in general, and how that's being used in business and utilised by businesses today. How social fits into the concept of building a continuous program of learning, particularly in the borderless workplace. And then some ideas on implementing a social strategy in your workplace today. So really today, we live in a social, on-demand, digital world. So today people want information fast, they want it at their fingertips, they want it accessible everywhere, and they want it to be relevant. So really in that context, too many things in my hands. So really in that context, you really need to think about not so much having a social learning strategy, but a strategy for learning in that social and on-demand world. And what does that mean? It means that it's not about blanket adoption of social media and throwing out the traditional learning platforms that you use. It's not about throwing away the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. And it's not about throwing everything into social media either. It's about having a blended learning approach and using what is best for the right audience at the right time and where people congregate. So a good example of that would be serving content and learning in real time to where it's going to have the most effect. An example would be a CRM system, for example. So traditionally you might train your salespeople in a classroom, go through sales training on how to move a prospect through to a client, and then that salesperson is going to be in their CRM, say in salesforce.com every day, looking through their prospect list and doing things. And when they move that prospect onto another stage in the cycle, you trigger a piece of e-learning content that's on demand at that point in time to give them a hint or a reminder about what they learnt in that classroom training. Still on the big globe. So in that sense, it's really about looking at where you can complement social media with your traditional learning platforms. So looking at where you can make it most relevant, and about looking at where people congregate and where they're doing their learning activities today. So how pervasive is social media? Well, I think we all know it's no longer an emerging technology. It's here as part of our lives. It now contributes 82% of the global online audience communication channel. Is the dominant form of communication on the internet today. So people are using it, it's here, it's part of their everyday lives. And this eye chart of a graph here is a graph by a company called eConsultancy, or a digital consultancy firm here in the UK, that really shows why people are using Web 2.0 and social in the work in general today. And you can see it's mainly for information sharing, product reviews, opinion. In other words, for learning. They're learning about what's going on in their life. So if you think about how that affects things, it changes the way we want to learn and the way people expect to learn today. So a good example from private life is if I want to go and buy a TV, for example, sure, I'll go into the showroom and I'll speak to a salesperson and I'll say, tell me about your TVs. And then as I walk out of the shop, that would be, I guess, my traditional classroom-based training experience, if you like, my offline experience. Then as I walk out of the shop, I'm going to pick up my smartphone and I'm going to go onto Facebook and say, hey, my peer group, my friends list, does anybody know anything about the new Panasonic TV? And then when I get home, I'm going to power up my laptop, I'm going to go on a Which magazine, and I'm going to look up reviews for the latest TVs. Then I might look at some blogs to see what people are saying about them. Then I might go onto Twitter via TweetDeck and see whether or not there's been any negative feedback on their after-sales service. So that means two things. It means I'm going through a continual learning process with multiple touch points. It means I'm more informed, and it means if you're a retail client, for example, your salespeople have to be up to that task as well. They need to be just as informed as I am as a consumer. But if you're not in a retail environment, you need to be aware that this is how people are expecting to learn today. So making sure that social is part of that experience is going to be very important. So what I'm hoping to illustrate with this rather gaudy slide is that really when learning is a process of acquiring knowledge, and social media is a platform for sharing content and sharing knowledge. So together they're happy bedfellows. They work well in conjunction with one another. So any learning program today has to recognise that this is the way the world has become and need to make sure that social is part of that learning experience. How are businesses using this today? I mean, we've talked about this is happening in our personal lives, this is what we're all doing, but what's happening in business? And really, when you consider that the war for talent means that we're having to be more efficient, do more with less, our employees have to be better trained, more knowledgeable, your workforce is stretched. You can see that using social media, Web 2.0 and digital technologies gives you a significant step up in the game. Over half of organisations increased engagement using social media. That's a huge statistic. If your employee base is more engaged, they're more energised, they learn more, they retain more, they're more effective, they're more efficient, greater return on investment, all of those good things. And yet, for all that, less than 30% of companies still have social as part of their corporate intranet. And the reason for that a lot of the time is because of adoption, fear of change, because people view it as a one-size-fits-all. It's either all social or not. So it's really about finding a blended way of doing that, because your emerging workforce, your 18 to 24-year-olds, whilst they may leave because they're using Facebook and YouTube, and you may think, well, good luck to you, we don't want you doing that anyway. But what this illustrates is people expect a social experience in the workplace. They want to be able to collaborate with their peers in real time. So if you're not providing that experience, that expectation is going to diminish. So how do companies put this into practice in reality? Virgin Media, a client of Cornerstone OnDemand, and they had a very clear goal. They wanted to increase the knowledge of their workforce, align their workforces better towards their corporate strategy and their corporate goals. They wanted to do that in a way that was compelling and engaging, but they wanted to do it in a very cost-effective fashion as well. So they took a blended learning approach. They looked at using e-learning to deliver content in an on-demand fashion that's accessible not just in the office, but wherever people are congregating. And then they socialised that. They used social media to push that and adoption of that program out to their wider workforce, and then listen to the feedback that they were getting, using social media to measure that conversation and understand what worked and what didn't, so that they could then refine that content over time and make it more relevant, more compelling and more engaging. In the process, they saved $100,000 on traditional classroom training. So you can see by using it as an enabler, in this instance, you have great effect. So ultimately, this happy guy is engaged and empowered. So using social media is really a great way of not only energising your learning and development, but it's a great way to re-engage with your audience, deliver them content in real time that's relevant to them, because it's quite often content that they've shared with their peers. It's going to drive efficiency and drive down cost. My Dilbert slide. Every good presentation should have one. What this is really saying, excuse me, what this is really talking about is the consumerization of IT in the workplace today. Today we're in a unique position that the technology that you have at home far outstrips the technology that most companies are providing you with. We all have a smartphone. Statistically, most of us have two. We have tablets, we have high-spec laptops, we're running off super-fast broadband. This is all we have at home today. But it's not just the hardware. We're all accessing the best-of-breed cloud technologies every day in our home. We're using iTunes, we're using Facebook, we're using Google. So what does that mean? It means a couple of things. It means, on the one hand, the expectation has increased. As we consume more technology in our personal lives, the expectation for that level of technology in the workplace increases. And so that expectation needs to be met in the way that you deliver your learning today if you want engagement and adoption of those learning programs. But it also means it's enabled the workforce to become more remote, more disparate. We can work from home, we can work from the train, we can do things on demand. So that provides a challenge for learning organisations in how do you serve that knowledge and serve that content when people aren't in the same place. Having trouble with the clicker. What I was just talking about is the fact that you now have a disparate workforce. It's become more disparate, it's going to become even more disparate. In that context, the knowledge sharing becomes ever more important. Technology now needs to be the bridge between your workforce, your development team in the UK, your sales team in the US, wherever it might be. How do you share knowledge around those people? How do you allow them to collaborate and become efficient at what they do when they're not in the same physical location? So the conundrum can be, as we have this borderless workplace, how do we provide a continuous learning experience? An experience where you'd have multiple touch points across your workforce. I missed this slide because of the clicker, so I'm going to go back and talk about this for a second. This is a slide from Burson. It explains what I've just been talking about in terms of continuous workplace. Traditionally, put that down again. If you look at a traditional training event, you acquire knowledge, that increases after the training event, and then retention is lost over time. In a continuous blended training environment, you have e-learning courses allowing people to get content on demand. You provide coaching and mentoring, and that may be face-to-face, that may be on the job, or it may be by video. You're tying that back to career development and making that content more relevant, and then creating communities of best practice to share knowledge, and to make sure that that knowledge is relevant. Pairing that with social networking to make sure that it's in a format that people want to absorb, and making it accessible everywhere. So doing that in a workplace that's now disconnected and disparate becomes a huge challenge. So one of the things that the companies have done to overcome this is looked at crowdsourcing. As companies become bigger, more complex, more diverse, more widespread, the complexity for their knowledge and learning needs becomes much higher. You need to be more specific, they have more specific needs, and so companies have turned to crowdsourcing in a number of ways to try and overcome that. One of those ways is simply by creating those shared communities internally within your business to allow people to share content, to capture that conversation and serve that content back in a more relevant training event. But additionally, training departments are being creative with this as well and looking at how they can use crowdsourcing to look outside their organisation. How can you leverage or meet that skills gap with people outside the place where you work? I work with a partner of Cornerstone's who are primarily a services-only business, but they do have a very small amount of their business which is software development. They do some small bespoke software application development. Now, as they're a services-only business, they don't have a whole range of developers, but it's still a very important part of their business. So how do they bridge that skills gap without hiring a whole army of people and their costs going through the roof? The way they've abridged it is by using crowdsourcing, by going out to the global community of developers that exists, presenting them with a problem where they have a skills gap, and then using competition form to incentivize people to come back with ideas and thoughts on how that software application might be resolved. So in doing that, they have a very cost-effective way of measuring and capturing applications for their customers. It also allows you, with the range of content that you need to run your business, with the diverse workforce that you have, it allows you to really start using user-generated content as a way of making sure the content's relevant, but also reducing your content costs. And possibly one of the most important things about using social in a learning environment is that you can start to build repositories. You can start to capture that conversation. You can start to collate that information that people are talking about. You can capture project outputs. You can capture questions and answers. You can start to build a knowledge base. And I'll give you an example. The last company I worked at was a tech company, and we had a lot of very clever tech engineers who were trying to do things for our clients. And inevitably someone would come up against something that was a bit of a sticky problem, and what they would do is they would email everybody in the company and say, hey, I've got a problem with this client. How do I solve it? And it was great. You'd get a huge response via email. Loads of emails would come back in saying, yeah, I've done that before and this is how we fixed it. But inevitably what would happen is 3 months later, someone new to the business or someone who hadn't seen that email chain or who'd just forgotten because that email had got lost in the millions of emails that they get would ask exactly the same question again. And it would go around and around. So the way we solved that was we built a social platform in the business that allowed a community of technical people to discuss ideas around how they could help customers, how they could overcome the challenges that they were facing. The learning department was then able to access that information and start building out targeted training courses based on that. So they're able to see this is a common problem that comes up time and time again. Let's build something that's really relevant and really engaging to our workforce because we know this is a problem that comes up. Without that, you can't measure success. You can't use data to inform your learning process. So with all this good stuff and all these possibilities, why business is not doing this today? Well, partly it's change, it's fear of change or inaction, and I think that's partly born of the point I made earlier, which is companies are looking at this as a one-size-fits-all solution. Oh, it's not going to work for us, or it's too much, it's too big. So it's really breaking that down into where it's going to be most effective. Looking at what the technographics of your audience is, what the demographics of your audience is, where is social going to be most effective? The pace of the industry is such at the moment that everybody wants to do something, but it's not sure where to start. This is a quote from a chap called Arthur Nielsen of AC Nielsen fame, is a market researching company. And this is several years old, this quote now. He was talking about, when he said it, about whether or not companies should invest in the web. Is the web a good place for us to be as a business? And his point was, well, with the pace of industry as it is, you can't afford not to. And that doing something or knowing something about your business is better than knowing nothing. And you can turn that on a head from a learning perspective, and you can say, it's not whether or not you can afford to do or implement a social aspect to your continuous learning model, it's about whether you can afford not to. Because your competitors are doing it, and the ones that are doing it are winning in the competitive war on talent. They're being more efficient. So here's some ideas for using social. Don't blanket adopt or reject. Look to complement, and this comes to my point earlier. It's not about delivering all of your learning all immediately through a social channel. It's about using social where it's going to be most effective. It's about understanding how you can use social to promote traditional learning, or how you can use a social network to capture the conversation. Look to adopt in specific, measurable fashion. So again, I'll use Virgin Media as an example here. They had a specific problem, a very specific problem that they needed to solve, and that was, why do some store managers perform better on a Sunday than others? What they would have done traditionally is they would have brought everybody in, talked about it, maybe delivered some training on best practices. What they did in this instance was they created a social network or a social forum for those store managers to talk about things, to react to one another and collaborate. Well, this is what works well for me, and this is how I've implemented, and this is what's worked. And that conversation then allowed that collaboration and in a very specific fashion. Now, that's not something they rolled out to their entire organisation. That was a very specific problem they were trying to solve, and social had the answer for that. Just like any technology, using small groups, look at where it's going to be most effective. Is pushing gamification and social rewards out to your entire business in one go going to be successful for the cost that you're going to have to do with it? Or are you better focusing that on a small target group and seeing if it works? Maybe focusing on interns, for example. And I think this is an important point as well, is be pragmatic. Just because it's social and it's cool and it's bleeding edge and everybody's doing it and you feel like you're being left behind because everything's going so quickly and everybody loves using it, if it's not delivering the benefits you set out to, having a clear goal in mind and knowing what that goal needs to be, if it's not delivering those benefits, then be pragmatic about the success of that project. And again, be smart about where social media will be useful. It's not just about the age and of your workforce, or the job role they do, or where they are in the world. It's all of those things. This is one of my favourite Douglas Adams quotes. I'll just read it out to you quickly. There's a set of rules that anything that was in the world when you were born is normal and natural. Anything invented between when you were 15 and 35 is new and revolutionary, and you'll probably get a career in it. And anything that was invented after you're 35 is against the natural order of things. Probably should be feared and shunned and hidden away from. And I think this is an important point in terms of understanding your audience, understanding that the technographic and the demographic of your audience. How savvy are your employees? How much are they using social media today? But it's also about listening to your employee base. And social media offers you a unique opportunity to do that. And it goes back to capturing that conversation that I was talking about earlier. It allows you to understand what channels are working most effectively and be able to target training where people congregate and to make training more relevant. So what is the most effective channel? Where are your people today? What do they log into first thing in the morning? Where are they spending their time? Delivering targeted training, whether that's via e-learning or through some social mechanism, is going to be more effective if it's hitting people where they work. So understanding that about your audience is going to be key to the success of any social media strategy that you might have. I'm going incredibly quickly with the mess up of slides earlier. Measure everything. One of the things that's so important about digital and social media today is that it's incredibly measurable. In 2009, more data was collected than in the combined histories of mankind to that point. That's in that 12-month period in 2009, more data was collected than in every 12-month period added up in the history of mankind. And that was because social media provides so many touch points, so many data points to interact with. So use that data. Start looking at what training courses are most effective. Look at what the conversation's telling you. Don't launch a new training program or new content and then look at the results to see if you were correct. Look at what the results are telling you first and make informed, data-driven decisions. So these are some takeaways. So this is like the most fast half-an-hour presentation that I've ever delivered, and I'm sorry for that. Your internal training should be social, and it should have a social component to it. It doesn't mean that everything needs to be social. It just means that you need to look at where it's going to be most effective and how social can provide a targeted response for you. It's affecting all elements of the HCM world today, not just in learning, and it's affecting recruitment, the way people want to use their talent. So integrating those sources together is going to be very important. And integrating learning into your strategy for the digital workplace is going to be crucial if you want to be competitive in that war for talent. The expectation is going to be that employees have a social experience in the workplace. So if you're not catering to that expectation, you're going to lose the engagement of your workforce and reduce the experience of your employees. Social is either a key platform or a component of a continuous learning program. It doesn't have to be everything, but it should be part of something. And that, as I said, is the fastest half-an-hour presentation you're ever likely to see. I wanted to thank you. We are running a big ideas board over in the Cornerstone stand. We'd welcome your thoughts on the future of learning. We're also running cocktails at 4 o'clock this afternoon. We'd love you to come around and talk more about this in more detail. Perhaps when I haven't got slides flicking through on their own and I can talk in a little bit more of a normal pace. There's also a chance to win a mini iPad. So with that, we've got like loads of time for questions. Are there any? No? Well, thank you.